Well, this is supposed to be like a stone carved banana. Mostly because I didn't want to bring a real banana up here and accidentally forget it. And then it would just rot away. To be fair, given the person we're going to talk about today, this also could get rotted away. Because now we're going to talk about Shinobu. This should be the last two for the Scabbards section. And then I believe I'm going to do several videos on Kaido because essentially he is the ruler of Wano. And he is a Yonko and is a ruler in his own right. And I did one about Big Mom. I did several videos about Big Mom, and then I'll probably end up doing some videos about Whitebeard at some point in time, and then eventually Shanks once we get some more information about him for the different Yonkos. But today we're going to talk about Shinobu, the bewitching kunoichi. I love Shinobu. She's great. So basic information about Shinobu. She is currently a retainer of the Kozuki family. She used to be part of the Oniwabanshu during her younger years under the Kozuki family, and then it kind of shifted to when it was under the control of Orochi. She was technically there during that part of time, but then like her loyalty was to the Kozuki family, so she like defected, which we'll get into some more information here. It is also stated that she trained under Kinemon as his protege, which is kind of odd because Kinemon is not a ninja of any kind. He is a samurai. Raizo being her kind of teacher would have made a little bit more sense, I guess. But that's not what Oda went with. Kinemon states that she was his protege, so sure. Whatever. Also, when that protegeing would have happened, I'm not sure, but that's what we get here for the information. We know that she is 49 years old. She is not one of the ones that gets sent forward in time. She stays in Wano during that whole 20-year time frame, which I'll be going over this. This will cover her life from basically birth all the way up until the Battle of Onigashima, just before the Battle of Onigashima. She's quite crucial during a lot of that during the Battle of Onigashima. She's quite busy running around there, keeping an eye on Momonosuke and then aging him up. But that'll be the next video. And in regards to aging him up, that goes to her devil fruit, the Juku no Mi, or the ripe fruit / enticement jutsu that she has. It is a paramecia type, and it allows the user to mature and decay anything they touch. So we see her first initial time we see her use her power is when Kaido is to attack the castle, is getting ready to use his Boro breath on the castle. She slaps her hand down on the ground and like matures / rots away, decays away the ground enough to make this giant hole pop up that her and those that were still in the castle fall down into, so they are safe from the Boro breath, so they don't get hit by it. So good on you, Shinobu. So in that regard, it's actually kind of similar to Tomura's ability, Shigaraki's ability from My Hero Academia, and the fact that he can, decay things away. But Shinobu also has a different ability that goes along with it, which is where she can mature something. We see her do this when she matures Momonosuke. She, ages him up by 20 years, so he becomes physically 20 years older and becomes physically 28 years old. Which again will be talked about later in the next video for this, and then later when I talk about Momonosuke. So we see that there for what her powers can do. She can either mature things to the point where they can decay, whether that be like a living object, whether that be like food or the ground. We see her like rot away the chains that bind Momonosuke later on. We see her do some other various things like that she's able to do to rot things away. We see her, mature Momonosuke. And unlike Bonnie's fruit that this kind of gets compared to a degree, she cannot reverse her ability. Her shifting of this is permanent. Like, she can't, like, age Momonosuke back up and then age him back down. She can't do that. That's not what her power does. It is permanent. He is now going to age normally anyway from 28 years old. So that's kind of the basics of what her fruit does. So I'll talk a little bit about those again later when I get to some of that stuff. And she does have an older brother, which I'll get to in a second. So into her history, as I said, she's 49 years old. We do not know what region she was born into, but she was either born into a family that they were ninjas anyway, and they tended to be chosen to be members of the Oniwabanshu that served the Kozuki family and have for a long time. Her and her brother, Shinosuke, who we see a grand total of one time and have not seen since. We see him during one of the shots of Wano where we're like seeing them like pan over the flower capital. We see him there like hiding and like I guess sending information to Shinobu. We've never seen him again. He's named in an SBS. It's like, yo, Oda, who was that dude that was there that looked like Shinobu? Was that her with a mustache? And it's just like, no, that was her brother. Shinosuke. His name. So he's there. I'm assuming he's just a little older than Shinobu. We don't know anything else about him besides the fact that they were both members of the Oniwabanshu. And, you know, we see in a flashback, we see Shinobu as like a little ninja, little kunoichi in training as part of the Oniwabanshu. And like she remembers meeting Odin when she was younger. And how kind of impressive he was, because he kind of recognizes her later on when they see each other. But so we see some of that, and then she trains to be a kunoichi. Kunoichi, some point in this time frame, she eats her devil fruit. Assumedly, we don't know exactly when she eats her devil fruit. Just like with a lot of the Scabbards, we don't know. For the ones who have devil fruits, we don't know when they eat them. Kanjuro, we technically know when he ate his devil fruit. He ate it prior to becoming a Scabbard, but the other ones like Raizo and Kinemon and Shinobu, we don't know when they ate their devil fruits. From there, she spends time training, and then what would have happened would have been, Sukeyaki gets sick, and Shinobu possibly may have seen some of this stuff firsthand. She sees that Sukeyaki gets sick, and then we see, she would be aware of the fact that he said that, Kurozumi Orochi will be his heir until Odin returns, and then of course Sukeyaki dies, and which is something that slightly bothers me about this is like, okay, Shinobu, like, she's this ninja that crawls around in the walls and everything else like that. We see this. That's like one of her talents is like, running around in the walls, and spying on stuff. To be fair, it doesn't make sense why she would be spying on her own people that she's obeying, but the people that she's supposed to be protecting, but still, she doesn't know that there's been this swap made and everything, and she doesn't know that this isn't really Sukeyaki that died. But she doesn't, like, she's like, okay, this is weird that they made Orochi this kind of random person who's here, that Sukeyaki made him the heir. And, so it gets usurped 28 years ago, and Shinobu's kind of there during that time frame. And then all the ninjas who are part of the Oniwabanshu that used to serve the Kozuki family shift over to now deciding to serve Orochi. Except Shinobu. She is the one exception, because Raizo wasn't a member of the Oniwabanshu at that point in time anyway. But she decides to leave. She doesn't want to serve Orochi because she doesn't feel that he is the rightful person that should be in charge of Wano. By a technicality, in actuality, should this have happened the proper way, I guess, if Odin wasn't there, and Sukeyaki, who may have legitimately been sick and may have been able to legitimately pick someone to rule, he probably would have just picked the one of the different daimyos to be the surrogate ruler until Odin returned. But that's not what happens. Get the whole switcheroo there. And Shinobu leaves the Oniwabanshu, and she, goes off. This might be during the time frame where she goes and maybe trains with Kinemon. I don't know. We don't know that much. And then kind of the next time that we find out anything about what's going on with Shinobu is when we get to 25 years ago, when Odin has finally returned to Wano, and he has made his way to the castle, to the capital, to the flower capital, in order to confront Orochi about, like, you attacked my wife and children, you're doing horrible things to Wano, I'm going to stand up to you and get rid of you and everything. And he shows up at the castle, and Shinobu is like hiding in the walls at this point in time. She is this beautiful, bewitching kunoichi that is just like this heartbreaker, I guess, to all the men. And she's like hiding in the walls, hiding in the ceiling, all this stuff. And she like listens in on the conversation that Orochi and Odin are having. And, she sees that Odin cannot actually attack Orochi because of Senimaru's abilities to block that ability, to block his attacks with his barrier fruit. And so she's like watching, and she gets to hear about the fact that, Sukiyaki wasn't actually, didn't actually die at that point in time, which, to be fair, I kind of wish Shinobu had found out that like Sukiyaki was still alive, and then like gone and tried to like find him somewhere in the castle, spy enough on Orochi to get the information, and then go and like try to like get Sukiyaki out of his cage, out of the basement he was trapped in. That would have been nice little additional thing for Shinobu to do. That would have been nice. So what ends up happening is, like, she listens in on this, and she finds out that, Orochi has been having, 100 citizens kidnapped all the time and taken to Kaido, so that way they're, used as, like, human hunting games on Onigashima, that type of a thing. And, used there as, like, slaves and everything. And Shinobu is like, oh god, well, that's horrible. And, like, she sees Odin make the deal that he will dance naked in the street in order, every week to prevent this from happening, to prevent these citizens from being captured and given to Kaido. So Shinobu knows about this, so she knows why Odin goes out and keeps dancing for the next 5 years, every week for the next 5 years, in order to protect the citizens of the country. As far as we're aware, Shinobu doesn't really have any like other contact with the Scabbards at this point in time. It's stated that she has some type of contact with, Kinemon because of training, but again, that doesn't quite fit the right way with me. And doesn't quite seem to match up correctly, given other information that we have. But what ends up happening is, over these next 5 years, she watches as Odin dances naked. Maybe she goes and tries to make sure that there are people not being kidnapped, but we don't know. And then we get to 5 years after that, so 20 years ago, which is when Odin and the Scabbards go, because they're going to go and fight against the Beast Pirates and Kaido and try to take Kaido down. And they get, on their way there. She joins them in the battle as an ally. Like Kaido, Odin kind of recognizes her, and she's kind of part of the battle. But unfortunately, because of the trickery that happens with Higurashi, excuse me, pretending to be Momonosuke, and that trickery and all of that stuff, Odin and the rest of the Scabbards get captured, and Shinobu initially gets captured as well, and Odin denies that she is not an ally of his. He has no idea who she is and everything. This results in her being able to go free. And from there, we get it to where it is time for the execution of Odin and the Scabbards. The legendary hour. And Shinobu is kind of the factor that comes in here and is kind of one of the things that causes the legendary hour to happen. I mean, like, Odin's already there, standing in the pot with the scabbards on his shoulders on the plank, as he's, holding them up and everything to keep them out of the boiling oil and everything for the deal that he made with Orochi. If, Kaido, if, like, we survive this, whoever survives gets to go free. And Shinobu comes out, and she's the one that starts proclaiming to the crowd about why Odin was dancing naked in the streets for the past 5 years, what all had happened, that Orochi lied, that Orochi caused all of these problems and everything else about that, and like all of this other stuff. And because of Shinobu's words, she is able to help with turning the tide of the crowd and having it be that by, like, at the beginning of that hour, they all just think Odin's a fool. And by the end of the hour, they're like, oh my god, Odin did all of this for us. He was trying to protect us. Oh my god. And so she's able to, like, make those proclamations to the crowd and everything, and then she is attacked by one of she's attacked by Fukurokuju and the Oniwabanshu, who try to capture her. She manages to escape from them and runs off when Odin, throws the Scabbards so they can try to get to Curry and try to protect his wife and children, and then, try to protect Wano and open it up in the future. Shinobu is, manages to escape as well and runs with them. She frees them from their handcuffs, probably just having stole the freaking keys, and returns their weapons to each of them. And then we don't really know what happens during this time frame. She gives them that, and then they're all chased by the pursuers from the Beast Pirates and the Oniwabanshu. Presumably something happened and Shinobu got separated from the rest of the group. To be fair, she doesn't really know, Toki and the kids all that well, so she wouldn't have any reason to know about the devil fruit power that Toki has. And eventually Shinobu would have heard about the prophecy in regard, Toki's prophecy that, she proclaims right before her death. But we don't really know exactly what's going on during that time frame for the next 20 years. She's, aging normally. She doesn't end up finding any of the other ones that we're aware of. She doesn't find Kawamatsu or Ashuradoji or Denjiro or Hiyori. She doesn't find any of them, to the point where she wouldn't be able to, like, find them and, like, make alliances with them or anything like that. She might stay in some type of contact with Suru, but again, we don't know. There's not much there that we know about for that time frame. Presumably she just continues to train. Her and her brother continue to train. That's about it. And then we get to, after the 20 years. And, like, Shinobu's sitting there and, like, not sitting there, but, like, she's not sitting on her hands while all this stuff is going on with, like, Orochi and Kaido, like, torturing the citizens of Wano and destroying it from the inside out. That's not what she's doing. She is probably trying her best to try to help people as much as she can, but not going as well as she would like, probably. And so, she does all that. And then we get to during the actual Wano arc, Kinemon and the others end up in the future, or they end up in the present. They jump 20 years into the future for them and end up in the present. And then from there, they leave. A good chunk of them leave, go on all their adventures outside of Wano in the New World. And then they end up back in Wano, and Shinobu eventually joins this group. And, maybe because she's, like, connected to, like, the network of allies and stuff like that, like those with, like, the crescent moons on their ankles and stuff like that, she goes through and, like, finds out this information that, oh my god, they're back. And she goes and she, like, this may have coincided for, like, when Kinemon and Momonosuke and the others returned from being outside of Wano. And, gets back and she's, like, so happy to see Kinemon. She's just probably so overjoyed to see Kinemon. And, and see Momonosuke and all of that. and it gets reacquainted with them and everything, and like helps with like setting up plans for what's going to happen with the fire festival. Now, when we as the audience initially meet Shinobu, this is when Luffy and the others that had gone on to Whole Cake Island have made their way to and Sanji to get Sanji and everything, and they get to Wano, and now they have arrived at Oden Castle in the Curry region. That Law took them there and everything. She shows up there, and Kinemon explains that she is going to be Nami's teacher as a ninja, because Nami's abilities with the weather and everything else like that she's able to do with her climb attack and now with Zeus, kind of fit into like the Kunoichi type style. Plus, Nami is a thief, so she's very good at being stealthy type of a thing. So again, that kind of flows into that. And so she is, Shinobu is going to be her teacher in this regard, which works out great. Her and Shinobu actually get along really well, which is fun. And this then leads into when, Luffy tries to go fight Kaido. This does not go well. And Kaido ends up, shooting his Boro breath at the castle and destroying the castle and like the top layer. But Shinobu manages to save everyone because she activates her Devil Fruit ability, as I said earlier. Activates her ability, slams her hand down on the ground, and like decays, rots away the ground. So basically turns the soil into like mud or whatever, and it makes them just fall. So they survive the blast that way. Initially, you're supposed to think that like they all got destroyed, and then you're like, oh my god, and you get back there. Oh, good, they're in a hole. That's better. So we have that, and of course Sanji. I love Shinobu's dynamic with Sanji, because Sanji is so used to being this, this flirty guy that just flirts with like any woman that shows up. And Shinobu kind of turns it on its head because she keeps hitting on Sanji, and he is very uncomfortable with it. I love that. Shinobu is just great when she like just messes with Sanji and everything, because she's like, okay, you want a woman? I'll be your woman, basically. And he's like, okay, no. He's just very thrown off by that, which is just funny. And I love that Shinobu is like still very confident in her body. I love Shinobu. I wouldn't mind cosplaying as Shinobu at some point in time, because that's a cosplay I could pull off. To be fair, I could pull off a Big Mom cosplay too, but I don't really want to. From there, we know that, Shinobu and the others kind of end up like separating off into their different groups. Shinobu takes Nami into the flower capital, and she starts guiding her for, spying and info gathering and different things like that. And they're like spying on some of the government officials, making like a weapons purchase and stuff like that. But unfortunately, what ends up happening, is that they're not as quiet as they should be, and the men hear them, and they start like stabbing the ceiling. With their, they pierce through the floors of the ceiling, the floors of the attic where Shinobu and Nami are, and they almost get caught. But Shinobu jumps out, and she activates like the big kite thing that we see ninjas have, and she's got like Nami hanging onto her as they're like flying away. So that's just kind of funny what they do there. And then we get to the banquet, where Orochi's having the big banquet at the Flower Castle, at the castle there, and he's got Robin is there as one of the geishas, and like Komurasaki is there, and Nami and Shinobu are inside, and they are spying as well from the attic. Unfortunately, and like we see Shinobu use her jutsu or ripe jutsu in various ways, where it's just like, okay, well, we can't really see what's going on below us, so she like takes her finger and like rocks just like a small bit of the board of the wood away, so they're able to like look through and spy on what's going on, because like people are less likely to notice that than a giant hole. So she's like very fine-tuned to a degree with like what she's able to do with her abilities. She can use it on the massive scale, like what we see with her rotting away part of the ground, but she also is like very able to like focus her power in and like very minutely rot away certain points. it shows that she's practiced with her power quite a bit, which I like when they show that. It's like finessed powers, finessed, very fine-tuned uses of their powers is something I like. So unfortunately, while they're in the attic, they end up running into one of the members of the Orochi Oniwabanshu, who so this is where we get the funny bit where Shinobu, where she's like, for some reason she like says her name and he's like, Shinobu, you're not Shinobu, the bewitching Kunoichi, you're an old hag. And she's like, take that, and she like whacks him in the balls. Another reason I love Shinobu, she's like, she takes crap from no one. Whack. Which I love that sequence that we keep every time that she does that to a guy. Like, yep, that works. She just calls it calls it one of her just new ninjutsu moves, but it's not. It's just her whacking him, which is funny. This of course coincides for when Brooke and Robin end up fighting against the Oniwabanshu that are at the banquet hall as well. This also results for when Orochi gets laughed at by Toko, and then he goes crazy at the banquet and ends up attacking Komurasaki, who then is seemingly cut down by Kiyoshiro, and all of that. So like they're kind of witness to this. Shinobu and Nami are kind of like witness to this as it's happening, but they manage to escape. And the Orochi and some of the other Orochi was chasing Robin at one point, and Nami just like strikes him down with a thunderbolt, which is kind of cool. And then Shinobu, Nami, Robin, and Brooke all manage to escape from this, and they end up heading to it's the Northern Cemetery in Ringo with Kanjuro is where they go. And so, this is where, Robin starts kind of looking after Toka a bit during this time frame, I think. There's not too much that we see here. Shinobu decides that they're going to return to the flower capital to go to the bathhouse, which then leads into the whole bathhouse scene where, Shinobu, Nami, and Robin are hanging out in the bathhouse. So we're getting all of that stuff, and we're getting kind of this like look in on Wano culture, but it's also just an excuse to see lots of naked women for Oda to draw a lot of naked women. And but this works in the way that like an info dump works, where it's like you're paying attention because there's naked women, so it's the same tactic that they use in like Game of Thrones when they just have like topless woman giving you explanations, but you're watching because it's a topless woman or something like that. So it's like that same kind of concept. It's like, ooh, nudity, I'll watch type of a thing. It's like catches your attention, so you pay more attention to what they're saying or whatever. But this is where she talks about Hirogoro of the Flower, where she's explaining about him and talks about Kiyoshiro and all this other stuff. Just like bit of like lore and information dump while they're in the bathhouse. And from there, what ends up happening is, of course, this is when Drake and Hawkins show up in the bathhouse and start causing problems. And Drake is at least trying to be a gentleman, and he's like, I really don't want to be inside here. Can we please not do this? And Hawkins is just like, you big baby. It's like ridiculing him for not wanting to do this. He's like, Drake is embarrassed, and he's actually trying to be a gentleman about this. You, on the other hand, are being a jerk. Which, of course, leads into when, Nami ends up, flashing everybody. And we go through all of that, and of course Sanji shows up, and he's in the raid suit, gets the nosebleed and everything else, and fights against, Drake in that regard, I think. And then Sanji is able to help get the rest of them out of there, so they're all safe. And then the next time, flies them away and flies them to one of the villages. I believe it's in Ebisu Town. And this is where Shinobu, I believe, ends up having... Yes, this is where she has her big confrontation with Law. Because, Sachi, Penguin, and Beppo have been captured. And somehow a bunch, along with a bunch of the other samurai and stuff like that, had like the crescent moons on them, on their ankles. So it's just like, there has to be a traitor among us, and your men got captured, so they must have been the ones who talked. And this is where we get like this very big emotional scene from Shinobu, where she is like looking at Law, and it's like, okay, so where she's coming from with this is, from her perspective, it appears that Law's men were captured and that they squealed, that they gave away the information about what's going on with the rebellion, because like, how else would they know if it wasn't for them? And of course, Law is insisting that like, no, my men didn't squeal, that wasn't them, they wouldn't have done that, they're stronger than that, braver than that, whatever. To be fair, they are. Law is correct. Sachi, Beppo, and Penguin were not the ones who squealed. This is information that came from Kanjuro, not from them. But Shinobu was also having a point here where she's like, we have been working for 20 years for this. We have been waiting for 20 effing years for this chance to take down Orochi. And like, she's like, she actually insists that they eliminate the imprisoned one, eliminate Sachi, Beppo, and Penguin, so they can't spill any more information. As well as also just like eliminating the other comrades that had been captured instead of rescuing them. Which, from her perspective, she has watched her country suffer under Orochi's hand for the past 28 years, specifically very much more intensely over the past 20 years. And she has been waiting and waiting and waiting for this chance to finally be able to take down Orochi and try to, help her country that she loves. And, she's very intense in this scene, and she has the right to do so. Kanjuro is actually the one who kind of like, maybe don't antagonize our allies so much, and makes them all calm down. Which is when Yasue shows up, or Tonoyasu, and Shinobu and Kanjuro have no idea who he is. He's like talking to them like he knows them. I mean, he technically knows Kanjuro a little bit, and I don't know how much he would have interacted with Shinobu, but Yasue kind of knows them, but knows Odin, knew Odin and everything else like that. And he's got like one of the call to arms messages, and he's like, oh, this is interesting, and he's like offering to help them. And he, like, the way that he speaks with them, which is something that doesn't quite translate correctly from Japanese into English, is like, he's being very familiar with familiarity with how he's referring to them, for like the titles that he uses for them, or the way that he's speaking with them, and they cannot figure out why. And they're like, do you know, like, when Tonoyasu leaves, the others that are there are like, do you know him? And they're like, well, he seems familiar, but I have no idea where I would have met him in the first place. So they're just like very baffled by this. It's like there's something familiar, but they can't figure out why. And this is, of course, the next day when Tonoyasu has been captured and when he is being held up to be executed. This is when they realize, oh my god, he was Yasue this whole time, the former daimyo of the Hakumei region. Oh my god, how did we not recognize him? And like, they all race, Shinobu and the others all race to the flower capital to try to see if they can save him. But he's executed before they could reach him, which of course for Shinobu, because she knows who he is very emotional. Maybe she doesn't have as much of a connection to him as like the Scabbards did and as Odin did, but she's still very upset about this. And so she's just very upset about this, and like, she watches as like all the citizens of Ebisu town just are just so distraught over this, because like now Tonoyasu is dead, and he was like the Buddha of Ebisu town that was like helping them and everything, and tried to give them actual reasons to smile as opposed to just being forced to smile because of the smile fruits, and all of this. And this is coinciding when like Hiyori is explaining to Zoro about the devil fruits, about the smiles, and when You know, some of the others are getting explained. Shinobu is acting as like the one who's describing the devil fruits for what the smile fruits for what they do. She's explaining it to like certain ones of the straw hats that are around her, so they understand what the smile fruits are and why everybody kept smiling so much, or couldn't seem to stop smiling. So she gives them that explanation. She's kind of there as Orochi, or as the Straw Hats fight against Orochi's forces that are there and manage to retrieve Yasuie's body. You know, there's a few other bits where she's just like gathering other information and everything else like that. The city goes under lockdown and we see all their posters get put up, including Shinobu's. And this is where they end up then relocating their base to Amagasa Village instead in the Kuri region, because that's a more remote location, so they're less likely to be caught. And from there, basically what ends up happening is Shinobu is kind of present as a bunch of this other stuff is going on. She's like, okay, well, we found everybody except for Denjiro and Nekomamushi, and we know where Nekomamushi is to a degree. And so she's part of like the discussing of like the strategy for the final battle. You know, oh, so we've got all these people from Udon prison, and Hirogoro is okay, and we've got Luffy back, and like all this other stuff. So she's just kind of there as a bunch of that stuff is happening, and finding out about like Yasuie's sacrifice with like changing the message for the Alliance to the Tokage port. Not the Tokage port where they're supposed to go, but you get the idea. And so we see a bunch of that. She's just there during this part of that. And then, 3 days before the raid, Momonosuke, Shinobu, and the Scabbards all head to the Tokage port where they're supposed to meet with the allies the next day. Or you get the idea. They head out and they're supposed to meet there. Unfortunately, when they get there, none of the allies are there. There's this huge storm going on, and they think that they're the only ones that are able to keep going because, like, what they're worried about is that Orochi has managed to bomb all of their allies and stop them from being able to find them, from joining them. And so they leave Momonosuke. All the Scabbards get into the boat and they start sailing off. They leave Momonosuke on the shore with Shinobu. So she's watching over Momonosuke, who's just like crying because he wants to be a part of this, because he wants to help. And what gets revealed is that, this is where the whole reveal of like Kanjuro as the actual traitor comes into play. Kanjuro had sent a, ink clone version of himself onto the ship, onto the boat to go with the crew, to go with the Scabbards. And it's revealed that no, not actually him. He's the traitor, blah, blah, blah. Real Kanjuro has been on the coast this whole time, stayed behind in secret, and he ends up attacking Shinobu and Momonosuke. Paints two snakes. The snakes attack Shinobu and wrap her up, so he's able to grab Momonosuke, and he, makes the ink crane and flies off. Kawamatsu shows up, fights against Kanjuro, manages, I believe, to help free Shinobu, and then that's when, Momonosuke has been captured, and that is when the Straw Hats show up, along with the Heart Pirates, the Kid Pirates, and all of their other allies show up at that point in time and get sent off. So this is now leading into the Battle of Onigashima, which is where I will pick up for the next video for this. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!